I want to talk to you tonight about the smallest commitment that has ever produced the biggest results in anybody I've studied. And I want to start by telling you it isn't what you think. It's not a 5 a.m. wake-up call. It's not some grueling 2-hour ritual with cold plunges and journaling and a dozen other things nobody actually sustains past February. It's 1 hour. A single, protected, non-negotiable hour, placed at the start of the day, before the day has a chance to take it from you. That's the whole idea tonight. 1 hour. And I want to spend the next while explaining to you why that specific size, 1 hour, not 2, not 30 minutes, is the exact size that actually survives contact with a real life, while almost every bigger, more ambitious version of this idea quietly dies within a month. Here's a confession I want to make to you, because I think it'll help more than pretending I've always had this figured out. Early in my own career, I tried the big version of this. 2 hours before work, sometimes more, packed with reading and planning and exercise and everything else I'd been told successful people did before sunrise. I lasted about 3 weeks. Not because I lacked discipline, and not because the ideas were bad ideas. I lasted 3 weeks because the size of the commitment was mismatched to the size of a sustainable habit, and when real life showed up, a late night, a sick kid, a bad week, the whole 2-hour structure collapsed, and once it collapsed once, it became twice as easy to let it collapse again the next time. I want you to hear that, because I think almost everybody who's ever tried and failed at a morning routine failed for that exact reason, and almost nobody diagnoses it correctly. They think they failed because they lack willpower. They actually failed because they built something too large to survive an ordinary bad week, and ordinary bad weeks happen to everyone, without exception, forever. Let me put some numbers on this, because the math on 1 protected hour is more powerful than most people ever calculate. 1 hour a day, 5 days a week, is 5 hours a week. Over a year, that's roughly 250 hours. Over 10 years, 2,500 hours, aimed at a single skill or a single goal. Now here's the number that actually matters more than the total, and it's the one almost nobody talks about. A study on habit formation that stuck with me for years found that people attempting large, ambitious daily commitments abandon them, on average, within roughly 3 to 4 weeks, while people attempting small, clearly bounded daily commitments, the kind that take real discipline to start but genuinely modest effort to sustain, maintain them at dramatically higher rates over a full year. Meaning the 1-hour version of this idea, precisely because it's smaller and less impressive on paper, actually produces more total hours over a year than the 2-hour version most people attempt and then quietly abandon. A modest commitment, kept, will always outproduce an ambitious commitment, broken. That's not motivational language. That's simple arithmetic, and almost nobody applies it to their own life until they've already burned out on the big version at least once. Why does 1 hour specifically survive where bigger versions fail? Because 1 hour fits inside almost any life, on almost any day, without requiring you to reorganize your entire existence around it. You can find 1 hour on a bad night's sleep. You can find 1 hour when a kid is sick. You can find 1 hour during a hard week at work, even if it means it happens at 6:30 instead of 5:30 that particular morning. 2 hours, on those same difficult days, simply doesn't exist, and the moment the commitment doesn't fit, most people don't scale it down for that one day. They abandon it entirely for that day, and abandoning it once makes abandoning it again far easier the next time, until the whole thing quietly dies sometime around week 4, exactly the way my own first attempt did. 1 hour, by contrast, is small enough to protect even on your worst days, and a commitment that survives your worst days is the only kind of commitment that actually compounds over years, because years are made up mostly of ordinary and occasionally difficult days, not the ideal days most ambitious routines are secretly designed around. Let me tell you about a man I'll call Owen Castellano, though I've changed the name because the lesson matters more than the man. Owen worked as a high school shop teacher, a genuinely good one, well liked by his students, and for years he'd wanted to build a small furniture-making business on the side, something he was skilled enough at that a few parents had already asked him to build pieces for their homes, informally, as favors. Owen had tried, more than once, to build a morning routine around this, 2 hours before school, sometimes waking at 4:30 to fit it all in, with a whole list of things he wanted to accomplish each morning. Sketching designs, researching suppliers, actually building pieces, marketing the eventual business. Every attempt lasted somewhere between 2 and 5 weeks before exhaustion or a bad week knocked it apart, and each time it fell apart, Owen told me, he felt a little more convinced that he simply wasn't the kind of person who could sustain this sort of thing, which is a very common and very wrong conclusion people draw from an ordinary structural mistake. I met Owen after a talk I gave to a teachers' association, and he told me his story with a kind of resigned humor, the tone of a man who's made peace with an idea not working out for him. I asked him one question. I said, Owen, on your best attempt, how long did the 2-hour version actually last before it fell apart? He thought about it and said, honestly, Jim, probably 5 weeks was my best run. I said, Owen, What if the problem was never you? What if the problem was that you were trying to build a habit that could only survive on your best days, in a life that, like everybody's life, is made up mostly of ordinary days and occasionally bad ones? I gave Owen one assignment, and I made him promise to follow it exactly, because I've found that people who modify this instruction before they've even tried it almost always end up back at the ambitious version that's already failed them. 1 hour, I told him. Not 2. 1. Same time every weekday, whatever time actually fits his real life, not some idealized version of it. And within that 1 hour, exactly one task, no list of 5 things, building the furniture itself, hands on wood, nothing else. No sketching that morning unless the sketching was the actual furniture work that day. No marketing research. No suppliers. Just the one core action that actually moved the business forward, protected inside one honest, defendable hour. Owen told me later the hardest part wasn't waking up earlier, which surprised him, because waking up earlier had been the part he always assumed was the problem in his previous attempts. The hardest part was resisting the urge to expand the hour once it started working, because after about 6 weeks, feeling good about his consistency for the first time, he found himself wanting to add a second hour, wanting to tackle the marketing and the supplier research he'd left out, wanting to turn one honest hour back into the 2-hour version that had already failed him 3 separate times. He called me, actually, around week 7, half asking permission to expand it. I told him, Owen, that instinct is the same instinct that's killed this for you every single time before. Protect the 1 hour. Let it run for a full year before you even consider adding a second one, because a habit that's only 6 weeks old is not yet strong enough to survive the added weight, no matter how good it feels in that particular week. Owen listened, reluctantly, and kept the single hour for the full year I'd asked him to commit to. In that 1 year, using nothing but one protected hour on weekday mornings before school, he built and sold 11 custom furniture pieces, entirely word of mouth from parents who'd seen his work, at a total profit that came close to matching 1/3 of his teaching salary. More importantly, and this is the part Owen says matters more to him now, he had, for the first time in his adult life, an unbroken year of daily proof that he could keep a commitment to himself, something 5 previous failed attempts at the 2-hour version had actively convinced him he could not do. At the start of the following year, with that unbroken 12 months behind him, he did finally add a second protected hour, this one for the business side of things, and he told me it held easily, in a way it never could have held a year earlier, because he was adding it onto a foundation that had already proven itself instead of building 2 untested hours at once and hoping both would survive. I want you to sit with what happened to Owen, because it's the whole lesson wrapped into one story. The habit that finally worked wasn't more ambitious than the habits that had failed him 5 times before. It was less ambitious, deliberately, and that's precisely why it survived long enough to compound into something real. Owen didn't need more willpower than he'd had in his previous attempts. He needed a commitment sized correctly for an ordinary human life instead of an idealized one, and once he had that, the willpower he'd always actually possessed finally had something it could sustain. Let me answer an objection I know some of you are already forming, because I hear it almost every time I give this particular talk. You're thinking, Jim, 1 hour sounds too small to matter. Surely something as modest as that can't be responsible for a genuinely different life 5 or 10 years out. And I understand the instinct, because our culture has taught us to associate impressive results with impressive-looking effort, and 1 quiet hour a day doesn't look impressive to anybody watching, including, often, to the person doing it. But I want you to consider the difference between looking impressive and actually compounding. A tree doesn't look impressive in its first year either. Nobody stands over a sapling and marvels at how far it's come. But a tree that survives its first modest year, and its second, and its 10th, ends up towering over the ones that were planted at the same time but never survived their own early seasons at all, because they were planted too large, too exposed, too ambitious for the ground they were actually growing in. 1 protected hour is the correctly sized sapling. It doesn't look like much in year 1, and that's exactly the point, because looking unimpressive is precisely what allows it to survive long enough to eventually become impressive on its own timeline, not on the timeline your impatience would prefer. So let's talk about what your 1 hour block actually looks like, starting tomorrow. First, resist every urge to make it bigger than 1 hour, even though, I promise you, that urge is going to show up almost immediately, probably within the first week, telling you that 1 hour isn't enough, that you should really be doing 2, that real success requires more sacrifice than this. Ignore that voice completely for a full year. It is the exact voice that killed Owen's first 5 attempts, and it will kill yours too if you listen to it before the habit has had time to prove itself. Second, pick exactly 1 task for that hour, the same specific way Owen picked building furniture and nothing else. Not a list. 1 task, chosen because it is the single most direct action that moves your 1 real goal forward, with everything adjacent to it, the research, the planning, the marketing, set aside for a different hour on a different day, or for later, once this 1 hour has already proven itself capable of surviving a full year. Third, place the hour at a time that survives your actual worst weeks, not just your best ones. If you're currently imagining a perfect version of tomorrow morning with no interruptions, no bad sleep, no sick kids, you're building the same kind of habit that's failed almost everyone who's ever tried this before you. Ask yourself honestly what time would still be available even on a rough week, and build the habit around that time, not the ideal one. Fourth, commit to a full year before you add anything to it, the way I made Owen commit before he was allowed to add his second hour. This is the step almost everyone skips, because a working habit feels so good after a month or two that expanding it feels like the natural next move. It isn't, not yet. Let the 1 hour run long enough to become something closer to identity than effort before you ask it to carry any more weight than it's already carrying. There's a fifth step too, one that matters just as much as the first four, and it's this: forgive the days you miss, and get back to it the very next morning without turning one missed day into a referendum on the whole project. Even the 1 hour version will occasionally get missed, a genuine emergency, a travel day, a morning that simply falls apart despite your best planning. The 2 hour attempts Owen tried before almost always died not on the day they were first missed, but 2 or 3 days later, when one missed morning turned into a story he told himself about having already failed, which made the next missed morning feel inevitable instead of optional. A protected 1 hour habit survives precisely because you treat a missed day as a single missed day, worth nothing more or less than that, and pick the hour back up the very next morning as though nothing had happened at all. The habit that lasts a decade is never the one that's never missed a day. It's the one that's missed plenty of days and simply refused to let any single missed day become two. Here's something else worth noticing about this whole approach. Nobody can see the size of your commitment from the outside. Owen's students never knew whether he'd spent that morning on 2 ambitious hours or one modest one. What they eventually saw, and what Owen's neighbors and fellow teachers eventually saw, was 11 finished pieces of furniture and a business quietly taking shape, and none of them had any idea it had been built on something as unglamorous as a single protected hour, kept honestly, for 1 entire year, without ever once being allowed to grow before it had earned the right to. And understand the compounding on this, because it behaves exactly the way compounding always behaves. 250 modest, sustained hours in a single year will produce more than 1,000 ambitious hours spread across 5 separate failed attempts that each collapse by week 4. The math doesn't reward the size of your intention. It rewards the size of what you actually sustained, and almost every person I've ever studied who built something real over 10 years built it on a commitment that looked, from the outside, almost embarrassingly modest, kept without interruption, for far longer than anybody watching would have guessed was even necessary. So here's what I want you to do, starting tomorrow morning. Choose 1 hour, at a time that survives your actual worst weeks, not your best ones. Choose exactly one task for that hour, the single most direct action toward the one thing you actually want to build. Protect that 1 hour, and only that hour, for a full year, resisting every urge to make it bigger before it's earned the right to grow. Let it become proof, the way it became proof for Owen, that you are capable of keeping a promise to yourself, because that proof, once you have it, changes everything that comes after it. Most of you are not going to do this. I've given this talk enough times to know exactly how it plays out. Most people will hear 1 hour and feel almost disappointed by how small it sounds, and they'll go home and build the 2 hour version instead, the ambitious version, the one that photographs better in their own imagination, and it will collapse by week 4, the same way it's collapsed for almost everyone who's ever tried it that way. That's their choice, and I understand the pull of ambition, because ambition always sounds more impressive than modesty, right up until modesty is the only version still standing a year later. But some of you are going to protect one honest hour starting tomorrow, and keep it small on purpose, and let it run for a full year before you ask it to carry anything more. And a few years from now, you and I are going to cross paths again, and you're going to tell me about the one modest hour that changed everything, precisely because it was the one commitment small enough to actually survive. That's the whole message tonight, so don't let it slide past you the way you've let so many oversized resolutions slide past you before. 1 hour, protected, aimed at one task, sustained without interruption for a full year before you ever consider adding to it. That's the entire system, and its unglamorous size is exactly why it works when the ambitious version never does. If tonight's message hit home for you, tell me in the comments what one task you'd protect that hour for. I read every single one of them, and I promise more of you already know the answer than you're willing to admit. And if you want more of this kind of straight talk on the habits that actually survive real life instead of collapsing by week 4, subscribe to Legacy Mindset, because this is exactly the work we do here every single week. Now go choose your 1 hour.